This is Jordan Tower with JT News. Make sure you smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. Okay, so it's day 8 of this Diddy trial. They started it off with a Diddy docketed on Don and Sean Combs. I guess the government responded. It says, in the first week of U.S. Sean Combs' trial, there was a talk in court about filings that were not included even in sealed redact from the public docket. On May 15th, Inner City Press, which is closely covering the trial, has now published 3 books. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Diddy docket, not dismissed. Suing Sean Combs for 2022 hard R word in Miami. Anthony Tate gave his name, defeats dismissal. Page 7. What is this? Okay, so this is a different docket. All right, we'll get into this later. So the judge, when Dr. Hughes is on the stand, this is a doctor. I'm sure Mr. Buck can raise that in cross. Okay, so that's one of Diddy's lawyers, I guess. So judge says these texts involve Miss Ventura and buying drugs in Boston. The government says we think it's irrelevant, but if they redacted it, it's not hearsay. That's what she was born in Boston and on her own. I think that's why Mr. Inglefino wants it in. They think on it. So they're arguing what should be admissible and not admissible. But it doesn't matter. The jury heard a lot of it, you know? So it's like, I never get that. It's like they can't unhear things. The government says Mr. Muscudi will not be testifying today. Did I miss that? They says we emailed at 10:45 p.m. No, not in the record. Why it's not. To redact that. So this is Kid Cudi. And it says press application to docket unseal government defense. They're trying to unseal all these dockets that are sealed right now. Inner City Press is fighting for that. Judge, please get the witness, Mr. Gannon, and check on the jury. Okay, Mr. Gannon comes in. The jury enters. This is 4 hours ago. It says, Mr. Gannon, let's continue with the items you seized on Star Island. This is the guy that's an HSI Holmes. He worked for the government. This is the guy who searched Diddy's house, right? He says, what is this? This is 3 cell phones I found in one of the boots in Diddy's house. Okay, so the government asks, display the Gucci bag for the jury. Pull up GX10A. And the stipulation, zoom in paragraph 5, a white plastic bottle. It contained liquid residue of meth and liquid MDMA. The government says these pills were found with a Tesla imprint on them. They had an active ingredient in Xanax. This is a $100 bill had residue of cocaine. Mr. Gannon, what is this? He says a dark wood box with the word puffy on top. How did you know that this Astroglide and baby oil is what you seized? How many bottles of each? Again, it says 31 Astroglides, 25 baby oil bottles. Government says, any other cell phones found? They said yes. AUSA references BX 1301, page 3, paragraph 11. Government says, was a gun found in the suitcase? They said yes, a 45. AUSA, hold up the bullets for the jury. No further questions. The judge asks if there's a cross. The defense says, the day of the search, you knew that Mr. Combs was leaving the country with his twin daughters? They object. Then after the sidebar, Diddy's lawyer says, in cross, in planning the search, you knew that none of the targets of the investigation would be there? They object to that. The judge overrules that. Agent Gannon says the plan was to have him not there, but we had contingencies. Diddy's lawyer says, what type of vehicles did you use? They said armored vehicles. And a boat come by land and sea? The lawyer says, he says, it's a common practice. 80 or 90 agents, give or take. And then the guy says, not at all at the same time. And the lawyer says, you found 6 people and kept them in handcuffs for an hour? Agent says, no, ma'am. There was one individual who wasn't happy with with us and wasn't cooperating, so we kept him in handcuffs longer because he wasn't happy with the cuffs. They ask, and then he says, there was a music studio in the guest house, right? DX305. Do you recognize this? The agent says, yes, ma'am. And it's a studio. Then they move to admit it. Photos of mixing keyboards and everything. It says, with love over everything. Agent is on the stand. Okay, so then they say, it's wrapped with a towel. The gun is wrapped with a towel. It didn't look like how you displayed it to the jury yesterday, right? He says, yes, ma'am. Did you find any photos of Mr. Combs with these firearms? They says, we did not. They said, do you agree that handguns, metal is easier to get fingerprinted than maybe any other type of device? The agent says, can't say if it's easier, but it can be done. He says, can you get prints off a gun? He says, easier when it's inside. He says, I think so. Tony Gugros at HSI, you have Mr. Combs' DNA, right? They says, I don't know. There's, when he was arrested, the government took DNA swab, right? He says, I don't know. Hold up the Gucci bag. The drugs in this bag in puffy box, right? He says, yes. Then they say, Your Honor, I'm going to introduce a sealed exhibit with your help. May I approach the witness? They say, yes. Deputy, we may proceed. Then the government says, cut off the screens. Okay, so the Combs lawyer says, please don't say any of the names of the people in this photograph other than my client. Don't talk about it. Then the government says, may we confer with counsel? They say, you may. The deputy says, we may take the sealed exhibit down. Let's see, you live in Florida. Many people don't have guns in their homes there? Objection. They say, because most people have guns in their homes in Florida. So that he's like, they don't? Like, and then they're like, then they rephrase it. He says, do you have handguns in your home? They ask the agent. Yes. No further questions. The judge asks a redirect from the government. They say no. Next government witness. The government calls Dr. Don Hughes. What's your profession? Dr. Hughes says, clinical and forensic psychology. I treat people who were in World War II with an honor. And then the government says, how many times have you testified in court? He says 60 or 65. SDNY, in Northern District. They say, we offer Dr. Hughes as an expert. The defense has no objection. Government says, what do you anticipate covering? The guy says, why victims stay memory. Okay. And then he says, have you been retained by the government? He says, yes. What's your hourly rate? He says $600. $6,000 for the day in court. $6,000? So $600 just to talk to him. $6,000 for the day in court. Damn. I guess because he has to clear a schedule? I don't know. Government says, why do victims stay? And then Dr. Hughes says, there are psychological bonds and psychological consequences of the abuse. The government says, what are the levels of fear? He says it ranges from physical violence to butterflies. Violence doesn't have to happen all the time. The government says, what is physical violence or psychological violence? And he says, throwing things, telling you you can do and where you want to go, like, kind of controlling. The defense says objection. The judge says, hold on, I'm going to strike that last answer. They already heard it. The jury already heard it. Then it says, AUSA Mitzi Steiner, what can be the role of sexual abuse? And he says, it puts a victim in a significant psychological fear. Why does it prevent leaving? They say shame, degradation, and they don't want to think about it. Okay, so then it says, what's an emotional abuser? It says, putting down your partner, feeling like a piece of crap. Okay, this is, what is financial dependence? It says the abuses of controls of housing and transportation, taking away her laptop. They say objection. It says sustained. Then it says, the government says, are you familiar with love bombing? And he says, the honeymoon phase, the abuser showers her with gifts and affection to get her back. Does it attempt to leave happen over time? He says, yes, it takes multiple attempts. Which is the most common coping mechanism? He says, trying to work it out because of the trauma bond. You don't want to lose your partner. Personal coping mechanisms. How does it placating or appeasing work? He says, we're trying to avoid abuse. And you would say, what is minimization? He says, the victim says maybe they had a bad day at work or maybe they were intoxicated. It's a way to like stay in the relationship but increases their risk. It's not a long-term strategy. It gets from one assaultive episode to the next. And it says, what about the power relation? He says, a person can have power as principal of a school. Like the victim asks, who is going to believe me? Ooh, that's a good one. Like, who will believe you? When does the victim finally speak? In a safe environment or after psychological help? What type of language do victims use when they first speak of it? He says they minimalize it. They are a piecemeal. They remember the chipping paint on the ceiling, the smell of the alcohol, and perpetrator's breath. They do a sidebar with Alexandra Shapiro's husband. Okay, then it says Combs Bach. Your clients, you observe them closely, their cognitive style. And he says yes. People don't fit into boxes, right? He says there are categories, and then he says, but you have to listen to particular individuals, right? He says, I'm not divorced from my training. Oh, okay, wait. There's a cross-examination. This will be Jonathan Bach, Alexandra Shapiro's husband, only recently brought on by Combs' 10th lawyer. Okay, so it says, this is Combs' lawyer. It says, your clients observe them closely in cognitive style. It says, yes. People don't fit into boxes, right? He says there are categories. And he says, but you have to listen to a particular individuals, right? He says, I'm not divorced from my training. Then Diddy's lawyer says, when you do forensic work, you want a lot of sources of information, right? He says, if it's relevant. And he says, you look at police reports, witness reports, like that, correct? He says, Dr. Hughes says, yes. He says, you're familiar with malingering? He says, I am. Diddy's lawyer says, people can fabricate emotional responses, correct? He says, they can. Judge says, Mr. Bach, should we break here? He says, I don't have a good cliffhanger. They just broke. It's over. Okay, so and then they says, during the break, George Clapton invoked his Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination. Who's George Kaplan? They bring in George Kaplan to welcome. Did you receive a subpoena? He said yes. Do you intend to answer the 5th a.m. grounds? He says yes. AOC Company, please sign the immunity order. The judge, he read it, and he says, judge, has he read it? He says, no, read it first. And then the attorney says, read it. The judge will sign an immunity order. All right, who is George Kaplan? I'll look that up in a second. Then they break, and they're back. They emailed you over the break. They say, we object to hearsay. Mr. Combs ambiguous advice. Okay, so we'll pick it up after Dr. Hughes. Please get her back on the stand. Witness reentering, jury enters. Then Diddy's lawyer says, you're with the American Psychological Association, which says you should only render an opinion after examination, right? They said, where? The lawyer says. And she says, this is a different role. Says, Diddy's lawyer says, you have not gathered information about this case, right? She says, I am not rendering an opinion on any individual. Sorry. Government says, there's someone named Cassie, but you don't know what she said, right? She said, I don't. Well, what is she up there for? She doesn't even know anything about this. Says, you testified across the river in EDNY, right? She says, right. She says, and you say the same thing, even with those cases are different, right? She says, it's to help jurors understand. And then he says, but it's their job to consider their case, right? And then the lawyer says, you don't publish data on the patients that you evaluated, do you? And she says, it's confidential. That the doctor says it's confidential. And he says, so I can't cross or check your experience on the basis of what you're saying, right? And then Diddy's lawyer says, People might go to civil lawyer and think little money, right? Objection. Let's move on. And then he says, the doctor says, in civil. Oh no, this is Diddy's lawyer says in civil litigation you might look for malingering, right? Hold on, that's where they left off. This is, I mean, just okay. Then it says, judge, jurors, we're going to send you in the jury room for a little, and then they leave them. Okay, so. All right, so they just tell her, like, you talk about battered women, and then they stop there. So, like, they're like, this doctor just specializes in battered women. But then they're like, okay. I think that the bringing her in was weak. So who is this person that is waiving his Fifth Amendment rights? Where's Kaplan? Diddy trial. Who is he? Diddy trial updates. Sean Diddy trial. I'm not seeing anything on George Kaplan latest articles and photos. Drug updates. Diddy arrested in 2020. Nothing on George Kaplan. Who is George Kaplan? George Kaplan. Diddy. Huh. Government witness George Kaplan, a former assistant. Okay, it's an assistant of Combs. He's waiving his Fifth Amendment rights. He doesn't want to testify. It looks like Kid Cudi might back out too. All right, we're going to leave it here. Obviously, we'll pick this up at the end of the day in about 3 hours. I'll report some news in between then. But this is what's going on with the trial. It's kind of a boring day in the trial, but you're getting an insight to, you know, the search and seizure of Diddy stuff and all that stuff. So it's a weird trial. It could go either way. But Diddy's being painted as a monster, and if they go off emotion, he's going to be guilty. This is Jordan Tower with JT News. I'll check you guys the next one. Smash that like button for me. Peace.